Hello and welcome to another TransForm Tuesday. I'm Dave McCormick, Vice President of Product Management here at Alpha Software, and I'm pleased to be joined again today by Sarah Mitchell, our Director of Customer Success. So today on Alpha TransForm, we're going to be doing another sort of beginner session. This one has to do with conditional fields and error checking. And I wanted to let you know, though, next week we will be resuming our discussion of the Internet of Things, and I'm going to be showing you an example of using Python to communicate with Alpha Transform. So if you're interested in that, please come by next Tuesday as well. So let's get going with today's subject. But first, a quick process check. Sarah, I just want to make sure that my screen is coming through and that you can hear my voice.
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay. So conditional fields and error checking. So the point of conditional fields and error checking is to make sure that the data that is entered is correct data, and that if it is sort of out of bounds or if something looks funny with it, that you can alert the attention of the person filling in a form so that they can make a correction to it right away. It can also be used to make forms, conditionals can also be used to make forms easier to read by not bothering to ask questions that don't apply unless specific other fields have been filled in. So let's talk a little bit about the conditions. So think of the conditions as sort of what if scenarios. So what if a value is outside of what's expected? I'll give you an example about that in a minute, but let's say there's a field and it holds weight, and if you put in a weight that's much higher than what's expected, maybe you could get an error or something like that. The next is, what if a combination of values together are outside of what's expected? So based on data that you collected in these fields, you're a little surprised that you got these other fields, or collectively there's something that's not quite right about that data. And the last one, the one I sort of just hinted at a moment ago, is what if the answer to one question leads to follow-up questions? So you may have a bunch of questions that simply don't apply unless a particular question is answered yes or no, or if a particular collection of questions are answered yes or no, or have some other value that triggers that condition. So that's the conditionals half of it, but the what if statements is what do you do with it? And that is, what actions can you perform? So one thing you can do obviously is ask follow-on questions, but you could also show a message to the user to say, hey, this is not the data that I was expecting. Or you could take it a step further and you can mark the form as having an error. So marking the form as having an error does show a message to the user, but it does a few other things as well, which I'm going to demonstrate. So let's use an example, and today's example is going to have to do with shipping. So while this is a fake example, let's take a real company, UPS, United Parcel Service. Among the various rules that they have about shipping regular packages through them, they have two in particular. One has to do with the weight and another has to do with the size. So with the weight, they don't want to take packages that are above 50 pounds. So let's just know that as a rule. The second thing is they don't want to take a package which is too large. And what they say is they can't take anything which is bigger than 165 inches in length plus girth combined. So in other words, the distance around the package plus the longest side, if that's above 165 inches or 419 centimeters, then that's not going to work. I'd also like to point out the reason I'm giving it to you in centimeters is there's no reason you have to use imperial or metric. You can use both, or you can let the user choose when you're putting together your forms. Okay, so now let's say we set up a form that we used for entering in packages before we ship them. Let me give you an example of that. I've got here two screenshots, and I'm using screenshots today, so I don't count on my Wi-Fi going down while I'm displaying my phone. But let's take a look here. Here's my here's the form here on the left, and it only has two questions. The first is, will it fit in a mailbox? Or I should have really said a Dropbox. Would it fit in a UPS Dropbox? And you can either say yes or no. And then what's the weight? Now, if we know that it fits in a Dropbox, we know it's not too big to ship, so we don't have to ask any other follow-up questions. On the other hand, if you take a look over here on the right, if you say, no, it's not going to fit in a mailbox, then we have to ask you the length, the width, and the height of the package. All right, so now let's go on to the next slide. Move that out of the way. And here we've entered in the length, the width, and the height. So the width was 10, the height was 10. So collectively, the girth is 40, because there's two widths and two heights. And 40 plus 140 is 180. So it says the box is too large, the length and girth exceed 165 inches. I also have an extra comma in there, which I don't need. We'll remove that in a second when I show you how this is set up. All right. So now let's go on. So that's showing a message. Now notice there's nothing else special that happened here. You just see a picture here. There's nothing alerting you up here that there's some problem. But if instead of doing it just as a message, we wanted to do it as an error, we could have done that too. And when you have it set up as an error as opposed to just an HTML message, you still get to see the message, but you'll see there's also a little red star that appears up here at the top of the header of your form. You'll also notice that if you had tapped the hamburger menu, you would see that there is a list of problems section here. And if you were to tap on that, it would give you the list of all of the fields for which there's an issue, and you can actually tap on that and go right to the field and fix it. This is very helpful if you have a form which has lots and lots of fields. So if you've got hundreds of fields or thousands of fields, and you don't want to have to go paging through it to find out where the issue is, the list of problems is a really helpful thing to have. Lastly, if you have marked something as having an error, when you see the list of forms on the phone or tablet, you'll see that it will say form has errors here in the list of forms. So those are how the error is just a little bit different than a message. You could do lots of other things too. You can search by whether or not the form has got errors. You can, so there are other reasons to use error flagging as well, but I wanted to show you how it was used here. So let's take a look and see how these were actually put together. I'm going to pop over here to Safari, and we'll go here to Alpha TransForm. I'm just going to move that window out of the way. And I've created a form here called TT Conditional, Transform Tuesday Conditional Field, Conditional Form. Okay, so here you'll see here are all my form commands that were used to build a preview of my form. Now this is an approximate preview because it doesn't know what values I've got filled in. So let's start here up at the top. The first field is, will it fit in a mailbox? And I've left its field title as field 1. I probably told you in other webinars, don't do that, give it a proper name, but I didn't, so sorry, but shame on me. Anyway, if this field is equal to no, in other words, it won't fit in a mailbox, then I want to ask the length, width, and height questions. So what I've done is I've created this section here which has got the length, a width, a height, and actually another conditional. We'll look into that in a minute. And I've bundled them into this if statement. I can get to the if statement right up here by basically selecting the fields that I want and clicking the plus button and scrolling down to where I get to the if statement. And I'm going to click the enclose button, something I showed you, I think, last week, and that will put it in the start if and the end if. So how do you set up an if? Well, an if basically just has got one thing that you fill out, and that is the test. That is the expression that you use to see whether or not it evaluates to true or not. So in this case, I said field 1, that's the will it fit in the mailbox field, has to equal no. If it equals no, in other words, it won't fit, show me these 3 questions here. Now notice I use this equals notation. Just want to make sure that doesn't throw you off. We give you the example here. That's just how it works. So instead of saying equals, you say equals equals. You could do that. We've given you a couple of other examples here as well. Okay, so now let's say we enter in the length, the width, and the height, and we've discovered that the length plus the girth has exceeded that 165-inch value. So we want to display that message. So what I've done is I've created another if block inside my first if block. Yes, you're allowed to do that. And this if block only has one thing in it, and it's an HTML block. And here in the HTML block, you'll see I did some HTML styling up here. I said make the color red and set the font weight to bold and set a margin on the box. And then I put in the text, this box is too large. Don't need the comma, let me fix that. the length and girth exceed 165 inches. All right, cool. Now, so that's what I did for this one. Now for the weight, we took it a step further. We decided if the package is overweight, so again, we've got another if block here, that instead of just doing an HTML block, we're going to do an error block. And an error block is pretty similar. You enter in the error text, and then there's an optional message. I just tend to set these two to the same thing. The optional message shows you more information, and I believe that appears when you click on that list of errors thing in the menu that I showed you a moment ago. So that's all you do is you set those two things there, and you enclose it inside this if block. So if this turns out to be the case, this error appears, and then the unit is marked as having an error. So that is pretty much all there is to it. Not a super long demonstration today. Let's go back to PowerPoint, just do a quick review. And that is that you can set up conditionals to look at the value of fields or the value of multiple fields. And if they fall outside or inside an expected range, you can ask follow-up questions. You could show a message to the user, or you can mark a form as having an error, which is similar to showing a message as a user, but also marks the record in a few other places and allows you to find the errors using a menu. So I hope that that's been helpful information for you. If we do have any questions, go ahead and type them into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel. Someone said, oh yeah, probably need to indicate that the fields are in inches or in kilograms. Yeah, absolutely. I did mean to point that out before. Yes, we will, that would be the right way to do it when I set up the form. So if I was back here in the form designer, I would probably do say height, and then I put inches or something like that next to it, so that when I see it, whoop, where's my height field? Length, width, height. I'd see that it was supposed to be in inches. So yeah, that's a good observation. Thanks very much. All right, well, thank you very much for joining me today. We'll be back next week with a continuation of our discussion of the Internet of Things and Alpha Transform. Thanks for joining us. As a reminder, if you have any questions at any time about Alpha Transform, feel free to send your questions to tfservice, as in transform service, at alphasoftware.com. Thanks very much for joining me. Thanks very much, Sarah. Take care. Bye-bye.